Hello, hello, hello. My name is Liz Marshall, and I'm the writer, the director, and the producer of Meet the Future. And if we pull up that last poster again, we can see that the film is having its release in the US and select territories coming up next week. This is on the eve tonight. I'm coming to you from beautiful British Columbia, which is, I acknowledge with respect, the privilege of living on and working from the unceded territories of the Squamish and Seychelles peoples. It would be remiss to not do a proper land acknowledgement on the eve of Earth Month as we're talking about the climate emergency. I want to thank very much the funder of this panel series. This is the final panel of Cultivated Meat, No Longer Science Fiction. And we welcome a very esteemed and wonderful panel of friends and colleagues that I've met over the years and had the pleasure of interviewing and including in the film. People watching on Twitter, this is live on Twitter, so feel free to retweet or engage there. If you'd like to watch the film, though, you need to sign up and register to this platform. So our handle on Twitter is MTF Film. And, we're posing big questions this evening and engaging in a conversation about the need to hope and the need to imagine a sustainable and secure climate future. And, I'm very interested as a filmmaker in pragmatic hope. And what does that mean? That means viability and working and focusing and illuminating, human ingenuity and pioneers and game changers that are, working overtime and risking everything to try to pave a way towards, a sustainable planet for all species, for our species, and for Mother Earth. As a filmmaker, it's been a long journey. It's been 6 years. We started filming in 2016. So it's been a tremendous privilege to be able to witness the birth of an industry over time. And I'd like to segue to the film's trailer. Let's watch it.
This is a story of planetary hope, inspired by one of the biggest ideas of the century.
This has been something that I've been dreaming about since I was a kid.
My whole life, all I wanted to do was be a chef, and I wanted to focus on meat.
My training is in biomedical engineering.
I was actually a tissue engineer.
I took an urban agriculture class that really opened my eyes to what we were doing to the planet just by feeding ourselves.
We want to separate the animal from meat making.
The division cycle of the cell, rather than the reproductive cycle of the animal. And this is a huge, huge paradigm shift.
These small tissue samples will produce extremely large amounts of meat.
From the consumer perspective, we're facing a brave new world. Technology that was once the stuff of science fiction, now becoming a reality.
There's a lot of fear around the intersection of food and technology.
The manufacturers of lab-grown products should be required to invest in their own market and not ride the coattails of beef's success.
Right now is a make or break moment for clean meat.
I am signing a letter with the largest meat trade association in the world. Felt like the right thing to do. We are going to bring everybody under this tent.
With meat consumption expected to double by 2050, we urgently need solutions. Welcome to the next agricultural revolution.
I just want to make sure you're looking at this as a very big historic thing in this world.
That is meat.
I think I've seen that trailer 1,000 times, and it's wonderful to have Moby involved and Dr. Jane Goodall, and I'll talk a little bit about their involvement later in the panel. But first, I'd love to introduce our panelists. So first, we have Anna Rathmann, the Executive Director of the Jane Goodall Institute. She is a global leader based out of the US. And the Jane Goodall Institute is a global community-led conservation, research, advocacy, and youth empowerment organization founded by the esteemed Dr. Jane Goodall. And Anna couldn't join us live today, but I did have the honor of interviewing her yesterday, and we will be including several of her answers to my questions as part of our panel. Next, my friend, my colleague, Bruce Friedrich, the CEO and the founder of the Good Food Institute, a global nonprofit organization that works on alternative protein policy, science, and corporate engagement to accelerate alternative protein innovation, to mitigate the environmental impact of our food system, and ultimately feed more people with fewer resources. Hello, Bruce. And then we have Lou. Yay. We have Lou Cooperhouse, the founder and the CEO of BlueNalu. And this is a leading cultivated seafood company based in the US with a mission to support the sustainability and diversity of our oceans and to provide cell-cultured seafood products that are healthy for people, humane for sea life, and sustainable for our planet. Hi, Lou.
Hi, Liz. Thank you.
Great. And over to Nicholas Carter. Nicholas is an environmental researcher of plant-based data, and he's an ecologist and serves as an advisor to several food and environment-focused organizations. And Nicholas's work focuses on the scientific links between agriculture and planetary health. Nicholas is also the communications lead for one of the data hubs for the Canadian Centre for Climate Services. Before we dive in, can everyone tell us where are you right now in this beautiful and troubled world? Nicholas, where are you?
I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Okay, so on the east coast of Canada, and I'm on the west coast. Bruce, where are you?
Washington, D.C.
Okay. And Lou?
Hi, Liz. Yeah, I'm in San Diego, California, so near the Pacific Ocean and home to a big part of our global supply chain challenge, the Pacific Ocean.
Okay, perfect. And I interviewed Anna yesterday from the DC area as well. So we'll dive in right now with my first question, which is directed at hope. So the first section of this conversation is really focused on hope and the need to hope. And, you know, the Jane Goodall Institute really amplifies this message, and especially through Jane Goodall's podcast, which is all about hope, and her latest book is all about hope. And so I will first begin by reading an absolutely stunning quote by Dr. Jane Goodall. I do have reasons for hope. Our clever brains, the resilience of nature, the indomitable human spirit, and above all, the commitment of young people when they're empowered to take action. So next, my question for Anna was, to expand. Anna, can you expand on Jane's message of hope as the bedrock of her work, but also the bedrock of your work through the Jane Goodall Institute?
Absolutely. As Jane often says, and as all of us believe within the Jane Goodall Institute, hope is a verb. It is something that inspires action. It's something that is contagious, and it is arguably the only thing that will allow all of us in this world facing these existential crises, ones which are complex and where the solutions are not easily identified. It's hope that encourages us to act and to come together. It's that hope that we give one another to come up with solutions, to work together, and to believe that all of our actions as individuals matter, because it's that collective, bringing that together, and the hope that we give one another that will allow us to solve some of these issues.
Great. Now, Bruce, it was 2016 that I phoned you, and I had known you for a number of years, and had interviewed you for a feature documentary of mine called "The Ghosts in Our Machine," and I knew that you were pivoting and founding and launching the Good Food Institute. So I called you, and we had a really important conversation as a milestone for me, because from there, you introduced me to Dr. Uma Valetti, who was, already in the press and the media cycle, having unveiled the world's first cell-based, cultured, clean meatball. And it was all over the media, Forbes and Fortune magazine. And the light bulb had gone off for me immediately. And as a filmmaker, I was actively seeking a solution-focused, character-driven story that I could follow over time. And it was such an important conversation that I had with you, because you really gave me the inspiration to move forward, to try to make a documentary about this emerging, burgeoning birth of a new industry, cellular agriculture. Let's call it that. Cultivated meat is what it's now referred to widely. So my question for you, Bruce, is what was it for you back then, when this was hardly on the radar, that inspired you to take a big career turn and risk to launch the Good Food Institute?
Thanks very much, Liz. And I remember that conversation extremely well. I was insanely, and still am, insanely flattered that you were interested in what we were doing at GFI and interested in this space. But basically just looking at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization is saying that globally, we're going to produce 70 to 100% more meat by 2050. And nobody has a plausible solution to all of the external costs. And I know we're going to chat more about that, but the adverse impact on the planet, the adverse impact on global health, the inefficiency of cycling massive amounts of crops through animals, the clear cutting of the oceans that I'm sure Lou is going to go into. And we're simply not going to educate our way out of the problem. We're not going to shame people out of the problem. So much like the goal with energy is not to convince people in developing economies to consume less energy, and the goal with transportation is not to try to get people to drive less and ride a bike and walk. That's going to be a slow road, and it's going to fail. And so similarly with cultivated meat or cell-cultured meat and seafood, the goal is not to convince people to eat less meat, because that's not tractable. It's not going to work. The goal is to produce the products in a way that eliminate or significantly mitigate the external costs. And I know that's where we're going next. But that was really the inspiration and the thinking behind the founding of GFI.
And just to dig a little bit deeper there for a moment, back in 2016, Memphis Meats was, one of the only, if not the first, startup in the field. Can you just give us a snapshot where we are today in terms of the number globally? I think it's over 100 or something.
Yeah, it's interesting. Uma and his co-founders started working on Memphis Meats literally the same month that I started working on the Good Food Institute. And they were accepted into the IndieBio Accelerator, and they started in October of 2015, which is also when I started working on GFI. And I worked on their media pitch. So they broke into the world with an exclusive in the Wall Street Journal on February 1st of 2016. And that's when GFI.org went live as well. So sort of to coincide with that. But yeah, in 2016, they were the first to incorporate. And at the end of 2016, I think there were 8 cultivated meat companies total. I think Memphis Meats Now Upside might have been the only one that had raised any money at the end of 2016. And now it's hundreds of millions of dollars and north of 100 cultivated meat startups. So very, very exciting.
Okay, thank you. So that's a good snapshot. It's also really a reminder and, case in point that human ingenuity is really something that we can hang our hat on to get us out of the trouble, to get us out of the problems that we are in. Let's move on to you, Lou. I remember first meeting you in 2018, and that was at the Good Food Conference. In fact, that was the inaugural Good Food Conference, organized by the Good Food Institute. And you are in the film in this really important little scene that takes place where you're talking with Uma about nomenclature. And there were different terms, and the language was just so interesting that was being sort of volleyed around, cell-based, clean, cultured. Now it's cultivated, like I said earlier. But so Lou, with BlueNalu, I'd like to understand, since you're really laser focused on the oceans, which doesn't get enough attention, that's for sure. What gives you hope right now?
Well, first, thanks, Liz, for having me on this show, and it's great to follow Bruce Friedrich and GFI. We're also fortunate of GFI's leadership in a space that's really helped educate the world. That gave me hope, frankly, back in the early days of BlueNalu. So back in late 2017, when I started the company, what gives me hope, Liz, is it begins with the consumer. Maybe I'll start off with a supply-demand response. So starting off with demand, I'm so excited. What gives me great hope is consumers are looking for these products. They are adopting reducitarian, flexitarian, vegan, vegetarian, whatever you want to call it. They are looking to reduce their meat consumption, and they are reading labels. They are looking for companies that can provide these solutions. So we've seen plant-based, and now there's fermentation, and now cultivated cell culture products that are next on the horizon. So my hope is that consumers want products that are not just healthy for themselves, but healthy for the planet. That's really motivating, and that's international. And then just to follow up on your last comment too, back on the supply side and ingenuity, we are now seeing over 100 companies in this cultivated cell cultured space that are creating products that are the real thing. It's not an imitation product. It's not an alternative product. Today we call it alternative proteins, but this is real proteins, the same thing. So my hope is that someday that conventional proteins will become alternative proteins, as these cell culture, fermentation, and plant-based products will be what people are most typically consuming. And what also gives me hope is kind of all the support we're seeing. So multinational food and pharma companies are really in the game here. They see this change happening. They want to be part of it. So whether it's in supply chain or operations or sales, marketing, distribution, we're seeing support. We can't do this alone. So I'm so excited by the level of global support that's coming from strategic partners. We have a bunch of them in place of BlueNalu. And kind of lastly, regulatory agencies around the world are also engaged. So they're seeing this, whether they're coming at it from an angle of food security or some other rationale, resilient food supply. They want to be part of this equation. So we're very fortunate, and I was very hopeful that Singapore was really first to do it, and other nations around the world, want to be there quickly too, and they're identifying the methodologies to really get these products into commerce, in an appropriate, safe manner. And I think GFI's numbers, but correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, I think it was $1.4 billion was invested into this cell culture cultivated space last year alone 3 times what we saw the year before. So we're seeing venture capital also motivated. So we're checking every box here. So the total planet seems to be aligned in this category, really being on fire. And I'm very hopeful that this is just the dawn of a total new transformation in our food supply chain.
Yes, the rapid acceleration is what surprised me the most, and I get asked that question when I do press for the film, the twists and the turns, but the rapid acceleration, from when we first started filming in 2016 to then what happened in 2017. I don't want to sort of provide spoilers. I want everyone to watch the film. But really the birth of this industry is something that has truly been, a fascinating journey and a real adventure of a lifetime to witness and follow from behind the scenes. Lou, just a little bit more from you, if you could, for people that are new to this conversation. What is cultivated protein? What is cultivated seafood?
Yeah, one way I like to explain it, Liz, is when a consumer is enjoying seafood, they might say, "Oh, I love the fatty nature, the mouthfeel of that product," or "That's a real lean fish." So they're describing kind of the sensory attributes of that product. So what cultivated cell cultured seafood is doing, or meat and poultry as well, we are beginning with an actual cell from that animal. So whether it's a muscle cell or a fat cell, connective tissue cell, we're using different processes to accomplish this goal. But we are making that same product, the same nutritional composition, the same sensory attributes, the same functional attributes as conventional seafood. But this, in the case of seafood, for example, it's no head, no tail, no bones, no skin, 100% yielded product. And by the way, absent of what might be normally found, including mercury, microplastics, toxins, environmental pollutants. So this is a product that's as you described by introduction, healthy for people, humane for sea life, sustainable for our planet. So it's a win all around. And really it's an opportunity to enjoy seafood with no compromise, and made just in a different way. It's not wild, it's not farmed, it's cell culture cultivated. So it's really all the things you love about seafood, but without any of the negative consequences.
Well, that's a lot to be hopeful about, for sure. So cultivated meat, cultivated seafood, you don't call it fish. Can you define why you just call it all seafood?
To keep it simple, I think sometimes a consumer or even the media might think we're making a living being. So I know this technology in the very early days was even called in vitro. So this is not that at all. This is actually making just the part that we consume, just the meat, just the tissue, just the fillet, or ground informed product, or any number of different product applications. So to keep things simple, seafood is the product we consume. Fish is a living being that we want to keep in the ocean. This way it's a little bit simpler if we just describe this overall seafood. That's really how most restaurant operators describe it too. They're offering you seafood to consume in any number of different forms.
Very, very cool. I like that. Nicholas, as an ecologist and a researcher in this space, you have a real expertise in the subject matter of deforestation and rewilding of land. So I'd like to begin with you by, could you unpack for people, explain what rewilding is?
Yeah, so rewilding is a movement to mass restore ecosystems so native plants and animals can thrive. And really, this is reversing the continued destruction of the natural world. Now, there's many causes of this damage, but it's clear that a main contributor was the unnecessarily, turning our planet into a big animal farm. More than 80% of all agricultural land is used specifically for animal source foods. So shifting away from these and rewilding by letting land be is a practical, inexpensive, and really hopeful solution. Now, the ultimate goal of rewilding is to address the species extinction crisis, But in doing so, we also draw down a ton of carbon dioxide. And a recent study showed that if we replace animal source foods in rich countries, we'd free up the equivalent land size of the entire European Union and draw down 100 billion tons of CO2 if this farmland is rewilded. So like, this is not an insignificant amount. It could potentially fulfill high income countries' CO2 removal obligations that they need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. So it's a major solution to be hopeful for.
And just to go further into that, I know that there's some controversy or something online. I don't go deeply into it. I would like to learn more, and I think I'm representative of the average person who considers themselves an environmentalist and wants to have a smaller footprint and cares about the future of our beautiful planet. Talk to us more about the controversies and why they exist.
I mean, I think there's controversies for rewilding because we just need to look at who's profiting off using so much land. Animal agriculture uses about 3 billion hectares of land. That's the equivalent to all of the continent of Africa globally. So I think it's important to see, where the lobbying money is, where political campaigns are focused on, and then we can see who's necessarily against rewilding. And there's a study out of the U.S. recently that showed in the U.S. the major livestock company Tyson has spent double what Exxon has on political campaigns and 33% more on lobbying relative to revenue. So there's a whole lot of push to not use this land for biodiversity, for drawing down carbon. And part of that is that there's not inherent economic value in this, but there really is. There should be. And it shouldn't just be about the money to allow space for nature, but it should be about just doing that because it's the right thing to do.
Great. Thanks, Nick. We're going to move this new section now of the conversation, which is really about the problem. We need to not look away. We need to talk about the problem. We need to understand some of the stats and what the big issues are that we're facing and why we're so focused on solutions and why we're focused on pragmatic hope. Let's take a look at a clip from Meet the Future. This is within the first act of the film, and it's both a problem and a solution all in one. Let's take a look.
The meat industry knows that they can't meet the demand of the people. And if the demand for meat is going to double by 2050, there is just no method of production that they have at their disposal now that would satisfy that hunger for meat. There just isn't.
Uma, would you just take your hands and clap them in front of your face like that? Perfect. Okay, everybody speaking?
Yep.
Okay, anytime, Uma.
So March 14th, 2017, that is today, team. We are here to do something that has never happened in the history of humanity. So thank you guys. Thank you for being here.
Here we go. Ready? Let's roll it. Whenever you're ready. All right, everybody go. Definitely step and get us. What's that? Christina? Anytime, Chef. Let's just get me a beauty shot of that, if you would.
In terms of technical breakthroughs that allowed us to do what we did over the last year, we had a few substantial isolated breakthroughs. So one of the things that was more relevant to the poultry is starting to have texture. Because with the meatball, there was texture, but not the types of texture we had with poultry, where we could have very clearly fibers that you could see in there. Fibrosity, starting to have three-dimensional nature to the meat that we're producing. Cheers.
Look at that teeny tiny team back in 2017 called Memphis Meats. They rebranded as Upside Foods in 2021 and did a red ribbon cutting ceremony in the fall of 2021 to unveil the world's largest and first cultivated meat production facility in California. So I'm still amazed at how quickly everything is evolving for this industry. I asked Anna Rathmann to comment from the Jane Goodall Institute's perspective on the issue of deforestation and biodiversity loss. Here's what she had to say.
Absolutely. So Dr. Jane Goodall is known for many things in our world. She's known for her seminal research that she did, being the first individual, male or female, to study wild chimpanzee populations. And she did that in their natural habitats, in jungles. But then fast forward a couple of years, and Jane was flying over that landscape, the landscape where she did that research with wild chimpanzee populations. And what she saw as she looked out the windows of the small airplane that she was flying in was this patchwork of forests, where deforestation had come and affected the entire ecosystem where she had done her research. And it was the effects of that deforestation were causing that habitat loss for that population of chimpanzees that she had studied. And she realized that the effects of that, what caused that deforestation, was not necessarily some huge external forces, but it was a much more complicated set of circumstances. Issues like poverty, issues like agriculture, subsistence agriculture, things that were really affecting the local communities and their abilities to find their own livelihoods. So that experience of Jane looking out the window and seeing the effects of this deforestation in that landscape that was so near and dear to her heart led her on this journey to really communicate this holistic approach to conservation and the ways in which deforestation is affecting all of our lives. And the understanding too that what causes deforestation is a very complex set of circumstances, oftentimes that are rooted in local needs and issues.
Thank you, Anna Rathmann, the Jane Goodall Institute, for that context. Very important. I'd like each panelist now to expound upon, the climate and health emergencies that are that are facing humans and animals and our planet. So we'll begin with Nicholas. Can you talk, Nick, to us about land use for animal agriculture? Just go deeper. You mentioned it already, but because this is your area of expertise, give us more. Give us some more.
So yes, deforestation is a complicated matter. Globally, I would say the biggest driver, though, is the production of beef, grazing cattle, and growing feed crops specifically for confined animals. I think this is something that doesn't get enough attention. It's just a huge issue. And just if I could reiterate that figure I showed before, if we shifted away from animal agriculture, we would free up 3 billion hectares of land. And so just understanding that, I think we should be deploying every single solution we can to make this happen. And, letting forests regrow naturally. There's a recent study that showed they'll actually absorb 23% of the world's CO2 emissions every year, on top of what they already do. So, regrowing forest in areas that were recently deforested is a great solution. But also, about 42% of all grasslands right now used to be forest or woody savannas. So major opportunities there too. There's all this talk about carbon drawdown and, different technologies to help kind of suck carbon out of the air. Nothing does it better than forests. And of course, there's like mangroves too, and vegetation in oceans that can be a huge drawdown as well. But essentially natural vegetation, that's the way to get carbon out of the air. And in growing that and allowing space for nature, this is how we address the biodiversity crisis too. So just for some more kind of land use context, nearly 60% of all agricultural land, so the biggest driver of agricultural land use, is beef production. Yet it only accounts for less than 2% of the world's calories, about 5% of protein. So it's very inefficient. And this has been the result of, this has resulted in displacing wildlife. It has a history of colonial land grabs at the expense of indigenous peoples. And with its inefficiency, where on average you only get about 10% feed crop conversion from feed to meat, even less so for beef, it's ultimately just a business model that's ready to be disrupted.
Okay, thank you for that. Lou, let's talk about another area that doesn't get enough attention, and that's the oceans. And, I'm actually living now next to the ocean. And so I'm thinking, and I grew up spending summers here by the ocean on the West Coast. I've seen changes. I read about it, deeply concerned about it. Let's talk about the oceans. Let's talk about how the oceans absorb a lot of CO2. Let's talk about its impact on waterways, on what about dead zones, from runoff, from animal agriculture. These are big issues. Over to you.
Thanks, Liz. Just to follow up on Nick's comments, as important it is to maintain our forests, it's equally important to maintain our ocean. Just a little bit of data there. So I think we all learned in school that, the ocean is more or less a little bit more than 2/3 of our surface of our planet, but it's so much more. It's also roughly 80% of the biodiversity on our planet. It's responsible for about 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. And to your comment, Liz, it more or less is responsible for absorbing somewhere about 25 or 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions on our planet too. So we must maintain a healthy ecosystem, absolutely, and we need to have more attention to that. So I think the problem is really exacerbated because people frankly love seafood. So the demand for seafood is in fact at all-time high. There's even what's called a blue foods movement about, as a medical community, is suggesting people consume less red meat and have more seafood. What is that doing? It's creating more challenge to our ocean. So here we have a demand that's already at all-time high, And as we know, when incomes rise around the world, and particularly it's an issue in Asia, which is already consuming somewhere between 3 to 5 times per capita consumption of seafood than we are, for example, in the Americas or in Europe. As GDPs increase, we're just stressing the ocean even more. So demand is up, and our problem clearly is supply. So our supply cannot keep up. It's diminishing, it's insecure, it's variable, it's vulnerable. I think, as Nicholas mentioned, similarly, it's fraught with issues that are of industrialization, and even a biblical process in which it's the only thing that we actually capture in the wild. So on land animals are very predictable. Sea animals are totally unpredictable. So fraught with issues of a potential for acidification or warming oceans. We just saw some research just last week about microplastics found in human blood that could actually affect our organs. So we have microplastics, toxins, and pollutants. There's IUU fishing. But as GFI will certainly acknowledge as well, 1 to 3 trillion fish are harvested each year. Is more animals by far than any other animal on the planet that we consume for human and pet food consumption. So in terms of animal lives, number one. So we really need to find a new solution. I had the opportunity to be at COP26, and it was exciting to see all the attention towards climate change, clearly, but very little attention against the issues of the ocean. So back to the hopeful question, I'm just really hopeful that there'll be much more attention towards what we can do to really support our ocean and the seafood we consume in the future. So it's not just terrestrial animals, but sea animals as well.
All right, and thank you for that. And Bruce, let's talk about public health risks of animal agriculture. I know that's an area that GFI brings to our attention, zoonotic diseases and antibiotic resistance. How can you educate us on this today?
Yeah, so GFI was originally founded to answer the question, how do we feed close to 10 billion people by 2050 without burning the planet to a crisp? And that's some of what we've been talking about. But there are 2 massive global health issues with the way that we produce meat today. One of them is antibiotic resistance. So the UK government says the threat to the human race from antibiotic resistance is more certain than the threat to the human race from climate change. We feed about 70% of all antibiotics produced by the pharmaceutical industry are fed to farm animals. It's leading to antibiotic resistance that the former president of the World Health Organization, Dr. Margaret Chan, she says we're swiftly approaching the end of modern medicine through antibiotic resistance. So if somebody wants to scare, Google the end of working antibiotics. You want an even bigger scare, add the word China to that Google search. And aquaculture, it's not just land animals. We talk a lot about sea animals, but aquaculture is also a big part of that problem. And then another one that oftentimes gets short shrift is pandemic risk. So there's a big debate about did COVID-19 come from a wet market or did it originate in a lab? Wherever COVID-19 came from, what the scientists believe to be true is that the most likely cause of the next pandemic is an industrial animal farm, and that could be aquaculture as well. It doesn't have to be a land-based factory farm. And the UN Environment Program in July 2020, and I would encourage people to go read this report, UN Environment Program Preventing the Next Pandemic. They list the 7 most likely causes of the next pandemic. And the first one is increased meat consumption, because the more animals you have, the more likely you're going to have one of them that has a zoonotic disease that jumps the species barrier. And the second one is industrial animal farming, because you have these genetic clone animals who don't have effective disease resistance, and then you cram them onto industrial farms, which is why they're fed so many antibiotics, and it depresses their immune systems further. So COVID-19, I mean, if you're in developed economies, COVID-19 sucked for you. If you are in developing economies, like the end of working antibiotics is super bad for wealthy people like the people on this call and the people watching. It is life and death for hundreds of millions of people in developing economies. Same thing with pandemic risk. So 150 million people were sent into extreme poverty based on COVID-19, and it was not a particularly deadly or a particularly transmissible pandemic relative to what it could have been. So the issues that we're talking about on this call are really global north and global south issues, in addition to being borderline existential risks, to the way of life for those of us in developed economies. They're literally life and death, and the end of communities for a lot of developing economies.
Thanks, Bruce, for that context. I want to reference some peer-reviewed research, which is a mind blower and a myth buster. Now, of course, this is still speculative because the production of cultivated meat and seafood has not yet been tested at enormous scalability yet. That's a hurdle that is to come. But let me read this to you. Cultivated beef is estimated at scale to reduce land use by more than 95%, climate change emissions by 74% to 87%, and nutrient pollution 94%. And I know that, Nicholas, you have a few other statistics to add to that. And this is part of segueing into the final part of our panel discussion, which is really about pragmatic hope and viability, and asking the question about, is this a silver bullet? It's hailed as one of the most brilliant, innovative, incredible ideas of the last century. Can it help us move forward and to build a sustainable, secure climate future and a humane one? Nicholas, can you add a few more stats?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I mean, for me, I think the main thing that's drawn me to this as a solution is the amount of land it'll free up. So, of course, it's 95% reduction in land use compared to beef, but even in comparison to chicken, it's projected to be about 63% less land needed for chicken. And part of that is because there's a major reduction in feed crops, where only a fraction is needed and used at about 3.5 times more efficiency than chicken, and 16 times more efficiency than beef. So, and I think with all this land, what I think we can kind of shape our future with is, we can incorporate progressive policy that also uses some of this land to support community and worker-owned farms, provide land to people from communities that have been historically dispossessed and excluded from owning land, and return land to indigenous communities. Many of these ideas were and are highlighted by critics of cultivated meat, but all these become far more feasible with commercially viable cultivated meat. So, and beyond land, it's projected to be a fraction of the air pollution, 49% less than pork, 93% less than beef. Freshwater as well will continue to be an issue as climate change impacts and drought continue. It uses 78% less freshwater withdrawals than beef. And it actually may use about the same as chicken or pork. So there's certainly about the similarity there. And I'd mentioned greenhouse gases as a bit of an uncertainty still, because it depends a bit on what the energy mix is going to be when this is fully at scale. Active cooling of cultivator tanks uses quite a bit of energy, but still about on par with the greenhouse gas intensity of chicken or pork. And we could choose to locate these production facilities where sustainable energy sources like wind and solar are. And of course, we need to decarbonize in every way in that sense too. So, overall, what's clear to me is cultivated meat, as well as other innovations like precision fermentation and plant-based alternatives, offer the theory of change that that is the most optimistic to me, especially within like our current capitalist system. This is going to restore biodiversity, ecosystems, and certainly offer the best opportunity to draw down some carbon out of the air too.
And I'll just quickly, Lou and Bruce, I'll just ask you quickly, is there anything that you'd like to add to the conversation as a final remark about imagining this, new food ecosystem, a more thriving, humane, and healthy planet? Bruce?
I'll just quickly answer your question, Liz, and dovetail with what Nick said. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all of the problems of the global food supply. And as Nick said, it probably does make most of them easier to solve, but it doesn't solve all of them at the same time and simultaneously. But it does solve some pretty big ones. So a fraction of the direct emissions, freeing up vast quantities of land for ecosystem reconstruction, which, as Nick was talking about, is something like 26 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in sequestration every single year. That's roughly half of the global human-caused climate change, eliminating antibiotics in food supply, slashing food's contribution to pandemic risk. And one of the things that's a little bit controversial is that it actually does and can, and one of the things I'm most excited about is that we can work with JBS and Tyson and Cargill and Smithfield and BRF and the seafood companies. Like, those companies are not in the business, like their fundamental business plan doesn't require all of the external costs of a 12,000-year-old technology. We've been growing crops to feed them to animals so that we can eat animals for 12,000 years. It's an antiquated technology. So if we can bring along the big seafood players and the big meat players, I love that Lou goes to the seafood conferences. If we can bring them along, and they're all looking at alternative proteins as a part of their business model. So it really doesn't solve agricultural consolidation. But it doesn't make solving that problem harder. And if these folks see this as opportunity rather than as threat, we can solve the problems, the climate change contribution, the land use and biodiversity issues, the use of antibiotics in food, and the pandemic risk of our current method of meat production a lot quicker. And as I mentioned a minute ago, that is most important to the people who have done the least to contribute to those problems. The close to 1 billion people now living in extreme poverty. They want this transition to happen as quickly as possible. So no, it's not a silver bullet, but we shouldn't look for a silver bullet because there aren't any. So you make the choices that you make and support the things that are going to make tremendous progress and see them as part of the overall solution to a more just food supply, but not a silver bullet, not everything that needs to happen.
Thanks, Bruce. Lou?
Yeah, Bruce said it real well, Liz. There's not a silver bullet at all, and I think it's all about partnerships. We all need to work together with industry, other stakeholders, governments to really, it's all about feeding the planet. So I think one word that I just want to maybe part with is our planet is fragile. Our supply chain is vulnerable. We need to find new solutions to really create not just food security, but just to feed, future generations. So cultivated meat, cell culture meat is really one of those solutions to really provide consumers with a choice that we actually feel has a lot of benefits, not just for people and animals, but for the planet. So it's a no-brainer to make that decision to consume cultivated meat. But I think what's really lacking still is kind of government support. So I just want to do a shout out that there's the other two folks on the panel are Nick and Bruce are certainly know the numbers better than me, but I believe $540 billion of government subsidy and support exists for conventional agriculture today. Projected to be maybe $2 trillion by 2030, per FAO. So, we will soon need that kind of support not just to really support conventional, as Bruce said, maybe 10,000-year-old industries, but really support this brand new sector that really can provide a far superior solution to some of our conventional practices.
Okay, thank you. And I asked Anna to provide us with a final comment for the panel.
Oh my gosh, I don't think we have enough time. There are so many wonderful examples of individuals and organizations coming together to really affect change in this area. Within the Jane Goodall Institute, we have several programs that are addressing this. And the role of science is really critical here. We have partnerships with some wonderful organizations such as Esri, who have allowed us to approach these issues with the overlaying of real scientific rigor to be able to map out the changes in the landscapes over many years. And then the approach that we have always engaged with our conservation programs, we call Takare, which is to take care. It's one in which we work with local communities, having conversations and bringing them into the dialogue and the decision making, and really empowering them to be the decision makers in their own community. And through that Takare approach, we have seen beautiful, wonderful examples of communities coming together, thoughtful, creative, innovative solutions to whatever challenges are affecting their communities. And then finally, we have a program that is near and dear to Jane's heart and all of us that care deeply about this program. It's called Roots and Shoots. And Roots and Shoots is a youth empowerment and engagement program where those positive ripple effects from young people identifying challenges in their communities and then looking for solutions and bringing others along with them. If that doesn't give you hope that there's a positive future for all of us, then I don't know what does. And so many of those programs often will focus on food and the ways in which food contribute to our relationship with the environment, with animals, and with one another.
Thank you so much, everyone. And just to leave, we're running out of time, but in terms of having a question for the panel, there is a question about in the context of rewilding, since deforestation and biodiversity loss is something we've touched on a lot here. In the context of rewilding, land currently used for grazing and feed crops, I've seen some arguments saying that these lands are typically lower quality and may not have many alternative uses. How would you respond to those arguments? Can we open this up? Who would like to take a stab at that?
I would. A lot of the times they call this marginal land, and it's certainly not marginal for the native animals in this space that are often fenced out from cattle grazing operations. So there certainly is some land that is a bit more degraded, but when it's so degraded and almost desertified, you still need to bring in feed and water for these cows. So especially in a world where we can grow plants and do cultivated meat, we don't need every inch of the world to grow food. So certainly in the case of food security in areas that need something like this to happen for food, we shouldn't be addressing there. The focus should be rich countries, and in doing that, we'll be able to provide a lot more diversity of healthy plant foods for poorer countries.
Yeah, I would also just point out that less than 1% of beef sold in the United States is 100% grass-fed. So even if there were some hypothetical argument for using for exclusively grass-fed beef, and I agree with what Nick just said, but even if there were, that's not the beef that literally anybody who's watching this, if they're a meat eater, is actually consuming. You have to go out of your way for it. You have to pay more than 3 times as much for it. It's definitely better than feedlot beef, but it very close to doesn't exist on the market.
That's a great statistic. The first time I learned that was from reading Eating Animals, Jonathan Safran Foer's New York Times bestseller back in, I guess it was 2012 or something. So that's great. And that's still the reality. So we're going to conclude this incredibly dense and important and timely conversation on the eve of Earth Month. I would like to read another beautiful quote by Dr. Jane Goodall. And if only we can overcome cruelty to human and animal with love and compassion, we shall stand at the threshold of a new era in human, moral, and spiritual evolution. Thank you for that, Dr. Jane Goodall. Certainly, as a filmmaker, as a pragmatic idealist, following this story over time and really hoping and believing that it is not necessarily the silver bullet, as the panelists articulated. That's not really very realistic, but it is certainly something that is remarkable. And that, what I love about this story is the viability of it, and that we as a human species, we need these viable solutions now, not in the, it's not a utopian aspiration. It's underway and it's happening, and it's, changing the way we think about food already. And so I'd like to just conclude again by saying that Meet the Future will be released on April the 5th in the US and select territories. And, follow us, go to our website. We have an educational guide, a discussion guide. Follow us on social media. We're working with a great team on a wonderful Earth Month focused campaign. Go to the Good Food Institute to learn much, much more about all the science and technology of cultivated meat production. And I am about to introduce the film for people that have registered. You can have a free screening right now. So kick back and enjoy the film. But before we do that, there is actually one more gem of a pre-recorded comment by Anna for us to depart on. Thanks.
What I would say is just how much we as an institute value approaching challenges with an eye to innovation, with an eye to creativity, with an eye to a holistic approach to any challenge. And that is something that I'm grateful for. That is something that this conversation is a part of that. And it is inspiring all of us who are a part of this and anyone who is listening to this. This is what gives me hope.
Okay, well, I would like to introduce Meet the Future. Enjoy the film, and it will end now on Twitter. So thanks to all the people on Twitter that have been following along, and enjoy the film. Thanks a lot. Thanks to our panel.